I stood alone on the cliffside, the freezing rain lashing against my face as they lowered my 8-year-old son into the mud. The wind howled so loud it almost drowned out the sound of dirt hitting the small casket. No mother, no father, no sister, just me and the storm. Then, my phone buzzed against my leg. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain. It was an Instagram notification from my sister, Jordan. A photo. There she was, sitting by a roaring fire at the most expensive winery in the county, holding a glass of champagne. My parents were behind her, smiling, glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "New beginnings, finally getting what we deserve." They were not stuck in traffic. They were not grieving. They were celebrating the payout. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their plans, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to know who is standing with me in this community. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone into the mud or fall to my knees in despair. The grief that had been drowning me for weeks suddenly crystallized into something sharp and cold. Clarity. I wiped the rain from my screen and dialed Thomas. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and respectful, expecting a grieving mother who needed comfort. Instead, he got a general issuing orders. I told him to freeze everything: the insurance payout from the accident, the trust fund, the access codes to the investment accounts. All of it. I told him to flag any attempt to access those funds as potential fraud. Thomas hesitated for a second, surprised by the steel in my voice, but he did not argue. He just said it would be done by the close of business. I got into my car, the leather seat freezing against my back. I did not turn on the heater. I wanted to feel the cold. It reminded me that I was still alive, even if the part of me that loved them had just died. As I drove the winding coastal road back to the house, the windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm, much like I had fought a losing battle for their affection my entire life. For years, I had asked myself why I stayed. Why did I let them treat me like an automated teller machine with a pulse? Why did I endure the snide comments, the forgotten birthdays, the way they looked at my son like he was an inconvenience? I used to think I was weak. I thought I was a coward who could not stand up for herself. But as the miles blurred past, I realized the truth. It was not weakness. It was conditioning. It is like the story of the frog in the boiling water. If you drop a frog in a pot of boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in tepid water and slowly turn up the heat, it does not move. It adjusts. It thinks the heat is normal. It thinks the burning is just how life feels. That was me. I had spent 34 years adjusting to the heat of their narcissism. I had learned to survive in a house with invisible bars, convincing myself that if I just gave a little more, paid a little more, endured a little more, the water would cool down. My compliance was not a personality flaw. It was a survival mechanism designed to navigate a minefield where love was transactional and approval was always just out of reach. But today, the water did not just boil. The pot shattered. I pulled into the driveway. The house, a modest, sturdy craftsman that my husband and I had bought with his money, not theirs, looked different. It looked like a fortress. I walked to the front door and pulled up the smart home app on my phone. My fingers did not tremble. I went to the user access list. Mom, Dad, Jordan. I did not just revoke their access. I deleted their digital fingerprints from the system. I changed the master code to a random string of numbers only I would know. The electronic lock chirped, the deadbolt sliding home with a heavy, mechanical thud. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I was inside. They were out, and for the first time in my life, the door was not open. I walked into the kitchen, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. It was too quiet. Benjamin's medical equipment was gone, donated last week, but the ghost of its hum still lingered in the corners. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. I was not going to cry. I was going to calculate, because they would be back tomorrow. The storm would pass, the winery would close, and they would come for the money. They would claim family obligation, They would claim I owed them. So I needed to be ready. I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it simply, The Debt. For years, I had been the silent financier of their lifestyle, the safety net they bounced on without ever looking down to see who was holding it. Jordan's real estate license? $4,000 for the course, another $2,000 for the exams she failed twice. I paid for it all because she said it was her dream, and my parents said I should support my sister's ambition. My father's investment opportunities that always turned out to be pyramid schemes or bad land deals? $25,000 over the last decade, silently transferred to keep him from losing his truck or his pride. And my mother, the medical needs that turned out to be a facelift. The therapy that was actually a spa retreat in Sedona. I paid for it. I always paid for it. And while I was writing checks to fund their delusions, I was scouring coupons for Benjamin's special formula. I was fighting insurance companies for coverage on his breathing treatments. I was wearing the same winter coat for 6 years because every extra dollar went into the Benjamin Fund, the very fund that had now grown to $1,050,000 thanks to the insurance payout from the accident. They did not see that money as a tragedy. They did not see it as the price of 2 lives. They saw it as a lottery win. They saw it as the down payment on the life they felt entitled to. Jordan had been talking about that historic lake house for months, dropping hints about how perfect it would be for family gatherings, how much potential it had. I had ignored her then, too consumed with grief to see the greed beneath the surface. But now, looking at the numbers on the screen, the picture was undeniable. They had not just abandoned me at the funeral. They had abandoned Benjamin his entire life. When he was in the hospital, Jordan complained that the beep of his monitors gave her a headache. My mother visited once, stayed for 10 minutes, and spent the entire time criticizing the nurses. My father never came at all. He said hospitals made him uncomfortable. They treated my son like an inconvenience, a depressing footnote in their otherwise perfect lives. And now that he was gone, they wanted to cash in on his absence. I stared at the total at the bottom of my spreadsheet. It was not just money they had taken. It was time. It was energy. It was the emotional bandwidth I should have spent on my husband and son, wasted on managing their crises. The ledger was balanced. I did not owe them a single cent. In fact, they were deeply, irrevocably in the red. And tomorrow, I was going to start collections. They arrived at 9 a.m. sharp the next morning. I watched them from the living room window. My father, Robert, tried the keypad first. He punched in the code, waited, then punched it in again harder, as if force could override the software. Jordan was pacing behind him, checking her makeup in her phone reflection, already annoyed. My mother, Angela, stood with her arms crossed, looking at the house like she owned it. When the door did not open, Jordan started banging on it. She screamed for me to open the door because the code was not working. I opened it, but I did not step aside. I filled the frame. I told them it was not working because I changed it. Changed it? Angela pushed past Robert, her face a mask of indignation. She demanded to know why I would do that, claiming they were worried sick about me. She said they came yesterday, but the storm was so bad they could not get up the driveway. I asked if that was right. I pulled up the photo on my phone and held it up. The fireplace, the champagne, the caption. I noted that the storm looked terrible at the winery, and it must have been hard to find shelter with all that Pinot Noir. Angela did not even blink. She claimed they went there to grieve privately because the cemetery was unsafe. She said they were honoring Benjamin in their own way. I asked if they honored him by toasting to new beginnings. Jordan snapped that I was hysterical and told me to stop making it about me. She said they had actual business to discuss. She told me she put the offer in on the lake house this morning. The sellers accepted, but they wanted a rapid close. She said she needed the trust disbursement by Friday. No, I said. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Jordan laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. She asked me to excuse myself. I repeated that I said no. The trust was frozen. The insurance payout was frozen. They were not getting a dime. Robert stepped forward then. using his size to intimidate, a tactic that had worked when I was 12. He told me to listen. He said the money was for the family. He claimed Jordan had been working on this deal for months, and it was an investment for all of us. I corrected him. It was an investment for Jordan. And it was my money. My husband's money. My son's money. Angela said I was clearly not thinking straight, her voice dropping into that smooth, dangerous register she used when she was about to cut deep. She said grief does strange things to people, and that I was spiraling. She listed my actions: isolating myself, changing locks, hoarding money. She called it erratic. I called it boundaries. She countered that it was mental instability. She said they had been talking. She told me if I could not manage these assets responsibly, if I was going to use them to punish my family, then maybe I was not fit to manage them at all. She threatened to petition for a competency hearing to have the court appoint a guardian. For my own good, of course. I looked at them. Really looked at them. The threat was not a bluff. It was a strategy. They were terrified. Not for me, but for themselves. Without that money, the lake house deal collapses. Without the deal, Jordan's status as the successful sister crumbles. Without my financial backing, my parents' comfortable retirement vanishes. They were not just greedy, they were hollow. Their entire identity was built on having the house, the car, the appearance of wealth. Without my money to prop them up, they ceased to exist. I told them to get off my porch before I called the police for trespassing. Jordan sneered that I would not dare. I told her to try me. They left, but the threat lingered in the air like ozone before a lightning strike. They were going to try to commit me. They were going to try to steal my life by claiming I had lost my mind. I waited until their car disappeared down the winding road before I moved. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation. They were serious. They were willing to weaponize my grief, to paint me as unstable, just to get their hands on the money. I needed to move faster. I drove straight to Thomas's office in the city. The contrast between the chaotic emotional violence of my front porch and the quiet, leather-bound sanctity of his office was jarring. Thomas was waiting for me, his expression grave. I had also called Chloe, my late husband's sister. She was already there, pacing the room, fury radiating off her in waves. Chloe had never liked my family. She called them vampires in beige cardigans, and now she looked ready to drive a stake through their hearts. I told them about the threatened competency hearing and how they said I was spiraling. Thomas nodded slowly. He said it was a standard playbook for predatory families. They try to delegitimize the gatekeeper. If they can prove I am unfit, the court appoints a temporary guardian, usually the next of kin, my parents. Chloe snapped that they would not get away with it because I was the sanest person she knew. Thomas agreed but said we needed to prove it. He said we needed to let them overplay their hand. We spent the next 3 hours building a war room. Thomas laid out the strategy. Radio silence. I was not to respond to texts, calls, or emails. I was to let them believe their threat was working, that I was crumbling under the pressure. Silence would make them reckless. While Thomas drafted the legal firewall to protect my medical records and mental health history, Chloe and I dug into the specifics of the lake house deal. Jordan had mentioned a rapid close. We pulled the property records. It was a historic estate, beautiful but distressed, listed for $1.2 million. Jordan's offer was $950,000, all cash, quick close. Chloe scrolled through the MLS data on her tablet and noted that Jordan had waived contingencies. She waived inspection, financing, everything. She was that confident she was getting my money. I said she had already spent it in her head. Then Chloe zoomed in on the property map. She told me to look at the access road. It was a private easement. We looked closer. The property was on a peninsula, accessible only by a single, narrow, private road that cut through the neighboring land. The listing noted access granted via deeded easement. I asked who owned the neighboring land. Chloe pulled up the tax records. Her eyes went wide. She turned the tablet toward me. The owner of the 40 acres surrounding the lake house, including the land the access road sat on, was listed as the Benjamin Trust. I stared at the screen. My late husband. He had bought that land years ago as a buffer for our own estate, a way to ensure privacy. He had never developed it, just held it in the trust. I had forgotten about it in the fog of grief. I whispered that the trust owned the road. Chloe corrected me with a wicked smile spreading across her face. The trust owned her road. She said Jordan was trying to buy a house that I controlled the only entrance to. I asked if she knew. Thomas looked up from his files and said she did not do her due diligence. She waived contingencies. She assumed the easement was standard public access. It was not. It was revocable at the discretion of the landowner, which was me, Chloe said. A plan began to form. A trap so perfect it felt like divine intervention. I signed the paperwork Thomas pushed across the desk, not to release the funds, but to authorize a full forensic audit of every family member who had ever had access to my accounts. I told them to let my family come. Let them bring their notary and their threats. I was ready. 2 days later, Thomas called me. He said they had filed an emergency petition for guardianship. They were claiming I was a danger to myself. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to stay calm. I asked what evidence they had. Thomas said they had text messages. A thread, allegedly between me and Dr. Peterson, my family physician. In the texts, I supposedly threatened self-harm and told Jordan to just take the money so I could end it. I gripped the phone. I told him I never sent those texts. I had not spoken to Dr. Peterson in 6 months. Thomas said he knew, because they had just subpoenaed the server logs. The texts were real, but they were not sent from my phone, or rather, they were sent from a phone belonging to me, but not the one I was holding. He explained what the forensic team had found. The messages were sent from an older model iPhone 8 registered to my Apple ID. The geolocation data for that device pinned it to Jordan's apartment at the exact time the messages were sent. I closed my eyes, remembering the funeral reception at my house, the chaotic hour before I drove to the cemetery alone. Jordan had been helping clean up. I had been looking for my old work phone to give to a charity drive. I could not find it. I assumed I had misplaced it in my grief. She had stolen it. She had stolen my old phone, guessed the passcode, probably Benjamin's birthday, and spent the last week texting herself from it. Manufacturing a mental health crisis to frame me. Thomas said that was not just perjury. That was identity theft, wire fraud, tampering with evidence. It was a felony. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, looking at the empty space where Benjamin used to play. My sister had kept a dead woman's phone, a phone full of pictures of my son, just to use it as a weapon against me. She had read my old messages, invaded my privacy, and twisted my grief into a suicide note, all for a house. Thomas asked if I was there. I said I was there, and asked what we should do. He said we should let them walk into the trap. The hearing was set for Friday, but they would try to corner me before that. They would try to get me to sign over power of attorney voluntarily to avoid the embarrassment of court. They thought they had the smoking gun. I said they did, a cold resolve settling over me. But they just did not realize the gun was pointed at them. The betrayal was total. It was not just greed anymore. It was malice. Jordan did not care if she destroyed my life, my reputation, or my freedom, as long as she got her view of the lake. She was willing to have me institutionalized to buy a patio. I told Thomas to let them come. I wanted to see her face when she realized I knew. He told me to get the house ready. He would have the forensic report courier delivered to me within the hour. And he told me not to let them see me sweat. I told him I would not. I was done sweating. I was ready to watch them burn. Friday afternoon. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky a brilliant, unforgiving blue. My family arrived in a caravan. Robert and Angela in their SUV, Jordan following in her convertible with the top down despite the chill. And a third car, a sedan carrying a notary and a man I recognized as Dr. Peterson's associate. They walked up the driveway with the confidence of executioners. I opened the door before they could knock. I led them into the dining room where Thomas sat at the head of the table, a single manila folder in front of him. Chloe leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them like a hawk. Jordan announced they brought a notary and dropped a stack of papers on the table. She said this ends today. She told me to sign the power of attorney, or Dr. Evans here would sign the involuntary hold order. She claimed they had the texts and knew I was a danger to myself. Angela chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She said it was for my own good, that I needed help, and they would take care of the money and everything else. I looked at them. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. Jordan was already mentally decorating the lake house. I said I had something for them too. I nodded to Thomas. He slid the forensic report across the table. He stated this was a digital trace of the device that sent those texts. iPhone 8. Serial number ending in 492. Registered to Jasmine, but geolocated to Jordan's apartment at the exact timestamps of the messages. Jordan froze. Her hand hovered over the papers she had brought. She stammered that it was impossible. I asked if it was. I reminded her that she was cleaning up near my desk during the reception, the same place I left that old phone. Angela looked from me to Jordan, confusion clouding her face. She asked Jordan what this was. I told Mom she stole the phone. I explained she texted herself pretending to be me. That was identity theft. That was fraud. I looked at the doctor and told him if he signed that hold order based on fabricated evidence, he would be named in the malpractice suit and the criminal complaint. The doctor backed away from the table, putting his hands up. He said he was not aware of this, and that he was leaving. He walked out the front door without another word. Jordan was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She whispered that I could not prove she took it. Thomas said the police could. He informed her they were on their way to collect the device from her apartment, unless she wanted to hand it over now. Jordan slumped into a chair, defeated. But Robert was not done. He slammed his hand on the table. He shouted, "Fine," so she made a mistake. He claimed she was desperate and that we all were. He insisted they needed that money. He said the lake house deal closed in 3 days. Jordan waived contingencies. If she did not close, she would lose her $50,000 deposit. He said she would be bankrupt. I told him she was already bankrupt. She just did not know it yet. Jordan snapped, asking what I was talking about. I mentioned the lake house softly. Beautiful property. Historic. Secluded. I asked if she checked the access rights. Jordan frowned. She said it had an easement, deeded access. I confirmed that. Through the neighboring property, a 40-acre parcel of undeveloped land. She asked, so what? I revealed that the Benjamin Trust owned that land. My husband bought it 5 years ago, and as the sole trustee, I had the right to revoke non-essential easements for security purposes, which I did this morning. I slid a second document across the table, a formal notice of easement revocation. I told Jordan I was putting up a gate, a big, locked, permanent gate. The only way to get to her lake house would be by helicopter or boat. There was no road access anymore. She was buying a $1.2 million island. Jordan stared at the paper. Her deposit was gone. Her dream house was inaccessible. Her fraud was exposed. The silence in the room was absolute. She whispered that I could not do that. I told her it was my land, and it was my road, and none of them were ever driving on it. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. I stood up and said that would be the police. Regarding the identity theft, I suggested she call a lawyer, but I warned her not to use the trust fund to pay for it. I told them to get out of my house. They scrambled for the door, Robert dragging a sobbing Jordan, Angela looking back at me with horror. They realized, finally, that I was not the victim. I was the one holding the keys. The silence that followed was different from the silence of grief. It was clean. It was the silence of a house that had been purged of a disease. The fallout was swift and total. Jordan lost her $50,000 deposit on the lake house. The sellers, furious about the collapsed deal and the fraud investigation, sued her for breach of contract. She is currently facing felony charges for identity theft and wire fraud. Her real estate license was suspended pending the investigation. She calls me sometimes, from new numbers, leaving voicemails where she screams that I ruined her life. I save them for the police file, then delete them. I do not listen to the end. My parents fared no better. When the story of the funeral celebration leaked, thanks to a few well-placed comments by Chloe, their social circle evaporated. The friends they tried so hard to impress turned their backs. They are isolated, bitter, and broke, living in a small apartment because they leveraged their own home to pay for Jordan's legal fees. They blame me, of course. They always will, but their blame has no power here anymore. It bounces off the walls of my life like rain off a window. I kept the house, I kept the land, but I did not keep the money. The $1 million felt heavy, tainted by their greed. So I gave it a new purpose. I established the Benjamin Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing financial assistance to families with children facing long-term hospitalization. It pays for the things insurance will not: rent, gas, meals, comfort. It ensures that no parent has to choose between being by their child's bedside and keeping a roof over their head. Every check I sign feels like a conversation with my son. It feels like telling him, "See? You mattered. You changed things." I spend my mornings in the garden now. I drink coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise off the land that protects my peace. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I have Chloe. I have Thomas. I have a community of people who love me for who I am, not what I can pay for. There is a myth that family is destiny, that because you share blood, you share a soul. That is a lie. The funeral was not just for Benjamin. It was for the idea of my family. It was the burial of the hope that they would ever be different. And standing at that grave, in the freezing rain, I did not just lose them. I found myself. I learned that cutting toxic ties is not an act of hate. It is an act of radical self-love. It is the refusal to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I chose my peace. I chose my sanity. I chose to honor my son by living a life he would be proud of. A life that is honest, brave, and entirely my own. I shared my story because I know I am not the only one who has had to bury a fantasy of a family to save their own reality. If you have ever had to choose your peace over their demands, share this video. Let us remind each other that we are not alone.